Hello and welcome to episode number 55 of the Curling Legends podcast. Today, my guest is Larry Wood. We are part of the Curling Podcast Network, and you can check out our other shows, From the Hack with Frank Rock and Two Girls in a Game, where you can hear Lori and Mary talk about their recent trip to the summer blockbuster bonspiel in Hollywood, California. We are sponsored by Curling Zone, the place to go for all your curling news, data, and stats and information every season, as well as Jet Ice and their full houses and in-ice logos. The in-ice graphics, from easy-in textile logos to the world-famous Jet Ice full house product, are great ways for clubs to enhance the appearance of their ice and to generate much-needed additional sponsorship revenues. Easy-in textile logos are the industry standard for high-quality logos that are a snap to install. Jet Ice customizable full houses are a relatively new way for clubs to grow sponsorship revenues by offering maximum brand recognition. No one can match the Jet Ice design services, quick turnaround times, and product quality. It's these attributes that are valued by major organizations such as Curling Canada, the World Curling Federation, USA Curling, and Sportsnet. They trust Jet Ice to provide the products they require for their high-profile events, and so should you. Jet Ice, they bring ice to life. Now on with the show. This is the Curling Legends podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Palmer. Larry Wood is now retired, but he was a longtime columnist for the Calgary Herald. Larry actually had a start in the sport of curling as a player himself, became a journalist, and eventually took on coverage of curling, which led to him working at least 53 Briers, starting in 1960, as well as many Scotties and World Championships over the years. Larry got involved in actually editing daily newspapers at those events. In 1990, that was the beginning of that with the Tankard Times at the Brier. This conversation was actually recorded in the fall of 2016. You'll note that Larry and I touch on some sweeping controversy as if it's very recent. Of course, that was several years ago. This was the first in-person interview I actually did and finally got around to getting all the editing done. I always enjoy a chance to sit down and have a conversation with Larry, and this was just one where we had the mics running. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure you will too. Here is my conversation with Larry Wood.
Maybe put your mic a little further away from you. Whatever, you got a sound thing there that tells you.
Yeah.
You got a needle there, haven't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know how all this stuff's working, right? This is...
No, I don't know how any of it works. And I don't want to know how any of it works.
Well, so... all right. Well, it sounds like we already kind of covered a lot of things. Now we're going to have to go over it all over again.
Okay, whatever. No, you were just asking me other people that I thought would be interesting to do pods with, you know.
Well, we'll get to that. But it's okay. So back to the beginning.
Yeah.
So why curling? As a young lad, or where'd you grow up?
I started curling right here in Calgary at the Calgary Curling Club.
So you grew up here, right? So
Yes,
born and raised?
No, I was born in Edmonton, actually. My first 4 years were at a place called Wassetna, which is 53 clicks northeast of Edmonton. Don't know whether you know where that is.
No, it was
Wassetna, you're from Edmonton.
Farmers, like where you're...
Yeah, well, it's
farming
mainly
family,
a Ukrainian place, but I didn't know that then because my folks weren't Ukrainian. But I was up there a number of years later, and there was nothing there but onion dome churches. I couldn't figure out. I don't remember seeing any of these. Then we moved to Red Deer. And I was there for 2 years, and then moved to Calgary. I was about the time I was starting school.
So why curling? Was there a buddy that did it?
I started curling in school, and I've always been a avid supporter of high school curling, and I was very critical when they dropped that out because. Most everybody I know who was any good in those days or even interested in curling, they all started in high school curling. And I started in high school curling, and there was a kind of a circuit in southern Alberta of high school bonspiels. The one in November at the Remembrance Day deal would be in Drumheller, and then the Christmas one would be in Lethbridge. And then the Teachers' Convention one would be in Tabor, and the Easter one would be in Medicine Hat. And the only interesting thing about that was there was never one in Calgary.
Were you playing at like representing your school?
Yeah.
Okay,
well,
so
that's how we got started. At that time, I was going to Mount Royal College and taking some high school. So we had a high school team. We had 2 years we had high school teams in Calgary. We played in a high school league. It wasn't very good.
Were there coaches as well back then, or was it just there was no? You didn't. No. You sort of learned the game through going. My father took me to the Calgary Club a couple of times, and after that, I was watching. I'd go down to watch the playoffs and stuff like that when I was a kid, But no, we never really got into really coaching. The only coach we had was one year at the Tabor Bonspiel. The guy was drunk the whole time we were there. He didn't help us at all. They just assigned this guy to you, or how did
I don't know how it developed.
Somebody's uncle that was a little bit shady.
I don't know how it developed, but it was kind of ridiculous. Anyway, by that time, that was our last year. And by that time, everybody knew everybody, I mean, Bernie Sparks was playing at Claire's home. And
who were the characters then that were around at that time?
Well, a guy named Ken Blaney from Vauxhall skipped the team all the time. And 2 or 3 guys from Lethbridge, including Barry Coleman. Barry Coleman's team, he had a hell of a team. They were tough to beat. Red Deer had a team, but they didn't get into it very much. But there was a team, Ronnie Monroe played out of Red Deer. A guy named Wayne Oates played at a Drumheller. A number, as I say, of Lethbridge guys. Coleman was the best of that crew. But
how many teams would be in some of these events then with these?
Oh, usually a 32-team spiel. Yeah, and some of them, like the Tabor Spiel, you had to have 1 girl on your team. Yeah, so you had to take...
That's a lucky girl.
Can you imagine high school Bonspiel? This was a competitive thing, but you had to have a girl on your team. That was the way they ran it then. But the most competitive ones were the one... Lethbridge was the most competitive one at Christmas, and the one at Medicine Hat and Easter was pretty competitive, although there was a lot of girls' teams in that one. That was actually around the clock spiel, the one in Medicine Hat. Started it when you got there and just kept going around the clock all night long.
All-nighter things,
and then everybody got billeted, and you were playing in the middle of the night and every other thing. Nobody got any sleep.
Did you move around different positions? What did you play?
No, I was either third or skip. I played third for a couple of guys, Ron Robb, who had been a friend of mine in school for years. I actually didn't realize he was a curler until later on. Who else did I play for? I guess I skipped my other teams, yeah.
And so here's the thing. So you're in high school at that era.
Mm-hmm. This is in the 50s.
So is it considered that is it respected at that point? Like where's kind of curling is it sort of recognized as, that you're in a sport, or is it a little kind of shun or what was the perception of it?
It was just something we did.
What you did.
Was it in the paper or anything like that?
Just even like, you're hanging out at school, and would other kids be impressed by your success at it, or would they go, oh, you're a girl?
No.
That's funny game on.
It wasn't, there was never much, they made a big deal about it. As a matter of fact, I played football too when I was in high school, but I would play split end. I practically got cut in half going up for a pass, and that finished I said, to hell with this noise. I'm not going any more football, because I was staggering around for weeks after that. It felt like I'd been chopped in two. But, we played other sports. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I just... It was mainly it was fun. It was fun. I mean, we got to know all the people, and we knew the guys in Lethbridge, we knew the guys in Vauxhall, we knew the guys in Tabor. Larry Fransden is a guy who, I don't know if you ever heard of him. He was in Medicine Hat eventually, but he came from Warner originally, which is a rural town south of Lethbridge. These people, all the towns around southern Alberta had guys that curled kids, And it was, as we were saying before when I was talking to you, it was more of a rural thing, I think, than it wasn't a big deal in the cities or in the city high schools, although there was some high school. Crespin Heights had a couple of pretty good high school teams. It wasn't nearly as big a deal as it became maybe 10 years later.
Yeah, I mean, so at that point, where's it on the national stage then? So Like, is there?
Well, everybody wanted well, actually, you wanted the crest in Alberta in those days was the Taylor Pearson Carson crest, which was like a teepee type crest. And everybody in high school wanted one of those TPC crests, and the only way to get one was to win the province. And
But that was the schoolboys.
It was like the Purple Heart in the Brier, you know.
But the schoolboys wasn't in place yet, was it, or was the Canadian?
No, high school.
It was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, high school started in 1947, but then it became a full national championship in 1950. Yeah. Fred Story was playing in it in 1951. We got knocked out in the provincials one year. It was the only year they actually got into it, and that would have been 57. Team from Calgary got in it. We got beat by the team from Crescent Heights, actually, in the final. But other than that...
And you still carry that loss with you to this day, it sounds like? You have
No, not really. The funny thing is, though, the year before, we were playing against Crescent Heights, and the guy who played third on the Crescent Heights team was Bill Warren, who became one of the big wheels with the Calgary Olympics in 1988. He's a lawyer in town, and he was a curler back in those days, too. So we talk about that every now and then when I run into him.
At this point, the Richardsons are just kind of coming in national prominence just as or they already had at that point?
No, when I played high school, they were... Well, I never heard of them until all of a sudden they were in the Brier, you know.
Okay.
By that time, I was right on the verge of working for a newspaper, but not quite. I covered them in the second year they were in the Brier.
Well, so tell me how that kind of came about. So you...
How did I get into the business?
Is it something you kind of always sort of knew as a kid?
Yeah, when I was in Balmoral College, I worked on the student newspaper and wrote a column and covered some sports and did movie reviews and a whole bunch of other stuff for the paper. And the Calgary Herald back in those days had a page once a week of high school news, and they took turns taking kids who would write pieces from one high school one day, one high school from another, and I wound up doing the Mount Royal thing a couple of times. I got to know the editors there in that year. After I finished high school, I tried to put the tap on the guy to say, listen, can you get me a job as a cub reporter or an office boy or something to get started in the business? Well, they were full up. They couldn't. This story is kind of ridiculous, but it's true. So he says, I'll phone my buddy across the street at the Albertan and see if they got any openings for a junior. So they did. So I went over there, and they put me to work covering things like the Muscular Dystrophy Society's annual meeting and all this kind of unexciting stuff. And I was interested in working in the newsroom and that, but I really didn't. I don't think I really... I wound up getting quite friendly with one of the Herald reporters. Actually, we both seemed to be covering the same stuff all the time, and neither one of us was really interested in any of it. Anyway,
but you're putting in the hours and getting your chops,
2 months after I started there, the editor called me in one day and he said, Larry, he says, I don't think you're cut out for this business. He said, I think you should probably think about getting into some other line of work or go back to university. I said, well, I was thinking of going to university anyway. Yeah, well, I just don't think you're cut out for this. And he stopped. And I kind of sat there and I said, well, I'm enjoying it, and so on and so forth. He said, but, he says, if you really, really want to try it, do it. He says, I know a guy at the Regina Leader Post, and he picks up the phone right then and there. I'm sitting, just like I'm sitting here now, phones the editor of the Regina Leader Post, puts down the phone and says, I got a kid that wants to come over. You start next week.
So sorry.
So 1 minute the guy is
the one
telling
minute
me,
he's saying, you're not really cut out for this. But you know what?
The next minute,
in Saskatchewan, I think you'd be okay in Saskatchewan.
Whatever. I think I don't know whether it was a money thing or what, or whether they. What that was. This is a true story. I hopped in my old Chevy and I drove over to Regina, and I got there late in the afternoon, went into the newsroom. Something about the newsroom of the Regina Leader Post just didn't do much for me. I kind of, I didn't have good vibes. I didn't have good feelings about it. About half the people in there didn't have English names, and I was kind of like I was just a kid. They said, come, go check into a motel and come in first thing in the morning and we'll get you squared away. So I drove over to a hotel, and I saw a motel over on Pasqua, and I checked in, and I was sitting there in the room having a pizza or whatever the heck we used to eat back in those days. I can't remember. Anyway, I had the curtains drawn, and all of a sudden there was one hell of a ruckus going on out in the street. And I didn't know what it was. And it was like one of those motels where you've got all the cement parking right in front of you, your door. And I'm looking through the curtain, and there's a gang rumble going on outside in the parking lot. And apparently, I didn't know this at the time, but there were 2 teenage gangs in Regina in those days. One of them was captained by our friend Murray Balfour, the hockey player.
Okay.
And I don't know who the other guy was. But anyway, they were having a full-on change and
so it's a full West Side Story without the music.
Yeah.
There's no music. Yeah. It's an actual rumble. Yeah.
And I'm looking through the curtains and saying, do I need this? And, there's crazy goings on here. In Northwest Regina.
Yeah.
So I sat there thinking about it half the night, and I got up the next morning and piled everything in the car and headed west. I didn't even bother going into the office. I heard about it from them a couple of times since, but, it was all a joke. I said, this place is for the birds. So I headed west and stopped at Medicine Hat and wandered into, and I knew I had all kinds of friends at Medicine Hat from the high school curling days. Stopped in there, and after I'd been staying at this buddy of mine's house a couple of days, I just wandered into the Medicine Hat News, and lo and behold, the guy said, I know your dad. And I said, yeah. I said, yeah. Well, so he hired me the next day, and I started out as a reporter. There was a news desk. It had a city reporter, a woman's editor, a sports editor, a photographer, and a news editor, and that was it. And I was a reporter. And
so you're covering.
You had to learn. You just cover everything.
Just everything. It's Medicine Hat. So
yeah, I'd covered everything.
Somebody gave
from
birth, or
elections and city hall and the whole deal. It was great actually, because everything that other than the city editor would cover a lot of the big stuff, but. I got sued twice there the first 2 years I was there. I got sued for? I got sued by Bud Olson, who was then the MLA or the MP for that particular area. He didn't like
and
something
how old are you at this point?
I would have been 19.
19 years old.
And I've been sued already.
And you're probably wondering, do I need a lawyer? What do I actually do in this?
I just said, hey. The editor said, don't worry about it, we'll handle it.
Who was your editor then? Who is it?
The guy who had one of the biggest influences in my career was a guy named Brander Parsons. Mm-hmm. And he was an old and hard-nosed, the kind of a guy you'd see in the movies, the old editor in a small town newspaper.
I don't want you to take this the wrong way, Larry. You remind me of those guys that I would see in the movie. I hope that's a compliment.
Sure. Well, it's been my life. So, but that's who he was. And there was no playing around with these guys. He didn't like what you wrote, he threw it back at you. And you had to sit down and pound it out again. And we were using typewriters in those days, there's none of this computer stuff. But you learned how to take pictures. You learned how to develop pictures. You used to do the darkroom. Then you went out in the composing room and you learned how to put pages together with the compositors. And you learned it all there. If somebody wanted to go into the newspaper business back in those days, that was a much better way to do it than going to journalism school. Because later on, when I started working at the Herald in 1960, the people that were coming to journalism school, they didn't have a clue. But they walk into a newsroom, what's going on?
Whereas you kind of learned, you understood everything, how everything was supposed to be done. You'd screwed up everything that they did at some point or another. 20 years old.
Sued twice.
Sued twice. Was sports always in the background, or it was just, you just wanted to write, you're going to just...
No, what happened was I worked there for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, and then my folks were really putting the pressure on me. They wanted me to go to university. So I took a year off and went to UBC. I couldn't go to U of A. There was no U of C then. And I couldn't go to U of A because I didn't have Math 30. I'd flunked it 3 times. So I went to UBC, and I took a year in UBC, arts English courses, and I came back and I had the job waiting for me at the Medicine Hat News in the summer again. And I just said to myself, I told my folks, I said, I said, this is what I'm going to be doing. I said, I don't want to go to university. University's fine. All you do is they try to teach you how to think. But the stuff that I'm taking, I'm not the least bit interested in. So, So anyway, I went back to stay at the News until January. Actually, it was in December of 1959. And I got a call from a guy who in those days was my hero, Gordie Hunter, who was the sports editor of the Calgary Herald, who I read his stuff faithfully.
Well, I was going to ask you that. Like, who were your guys coming up that you read?
Gordie Hunter was the number one guy. He was a sports columnist and the sports editor at the Calgary Herald. He'd be the Jack Madison of Calgary, So he calls me out of the blue. I know why he did it, though, because I've been covering baseball that summer, and Calgary and Medicine Hat were in the same league. And another guy who worked at the Herald at the time had come down to Medicine Hat for a series, and we got along pretty good, had a few beers, talked in the press box, and he said, would you be interested in coming up? I said, you kidding? I said, Gordie, he told me about Gordie, and the next thing you know, he's on the phone to me, and I'm sure. So I came up to Calgary at Christmas, and I went over to his house and talked to him, and the next thing you know, they were hiring me.
So the position was
kind of a junior sports desk editor and
so you're kind of
writer.
you're working under your childhood writing hero essentially at that point.
Yeah.
The guy, okay.
Yeah.
And so is that intimidating, or is that actually something that you were?
No, he wasn't the kind of a guy that would intimidate you. No, he was a great guy. He was a great.
So he wasn't frightened of the young whippersnapper that was going to come and.
No, because in those days I wasn't that good. And on top of which, it was a good staff. My first two beats were curling and baseball, which were perfect for me.
So one of the points you're saying, like, so there's a curling beat at the time.
Yes.
Obviously, it's not.
Yeah,
but
curling,
I mean, that was
the guy
that was
who was doing it before I did it was doing golf and curling. So he was doing the same kind of stuff all year round. But they split it up, and I did baseball. They had a semi-pro team there in the summer. There was the same league as Medicine Hat, and there was another bunch of teams around and above it. I mean, there were some great ball players came through there. Nelson Briers pitched for Cardinals. He pitched for the Calgary team, and Edmonton was in the league. The Edmonton Dodgers, they had players. And there was a lot of connection.
There was a lot of baseball history in Canada that people tend to forget.
They were college players who hadn't signed yet with any particular team, but they were on the verge of it, That league back then was very good.
All right, so now let's get back to curling. So now at this point, had you been?
Well,
we still have to touch on your own career from time to time. I mean, I know it's not as illustrious, but but did you? I mean, were you still, even while you were working at this point, you're in Medicine Hat or you're back in Calgary? Were you still trying to curl, or were you still playing? And okay,
I played with Fransden, and I played in Medicine Hat. Another guy then in Medicine Hat I played with, and when I got back to Calgary, we had a team in the A or B section for 10 years. Probably in that.
So was there Purple Heart dreams at one point then in your younger days then?
Purple Heart? I don't know. It wasn't the same as the high school. I really would have loved to have gone to one of those Canadian juniors. But I don't know whether it was kind of intimidating in this town because a guy named Northcott who kept hanging around all the time, and every time you try and get really close, he'd beat you. I mean, they had some pretty good teams here. I played third for two guys that wound up playing for Northcott later. No way. Nobody could beat the guy in the 60s around here. Like he just win every time. We had him down in the Southern Alberta Playdowns in Tabor one year, and I was playing third for Lloyd Woolley, who also played with Northcott on occasion. He's from Regina, actually. Moved to Calgary. We couldn't beat him there. Saco and I played against him in the Evergreen in Vancouver. Bang, out. Every time we played him, he beat us, which was fair. He was, we just weren't that good. That's all. We were good, but he was just, it's like Richardson the years in Regina. He was just slightly better than anybody else.
Maybe you were smart about this. So there were certain guys that, busted their ass. Most of them never got there to get to the Brier. You just went a whole bunch of times. And it wasn't on somebody,
Well, it's like, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I wound up going every year anyway.
And back then, it was a train trip, right? As I understand it, right? Back in the what was it?
Not by the time I started covering it.
Well, what was your first Brier?
Thunder Bay in 1960.
In 1960,
Yeah,
okay. So that was, you were on planes by then. That wasn't the Brier train, okay?
That was like one of those Vanguard or whatever they called those things back then, with the round windows. And the next year it was in Calgary, which is part of the reason why I went to 1960, because Calgary was getting the Brier the next year. And then the year after, after that, I was just in it every year. I mean, I missed 2 Briers through until I retired. I think that I don't think. It's kind of like Vin Scully in a way, although I would never compare myself with him. But in terms of, I don't think there's anybody in my business that will have to go to a lot of Briers to catch my record, because I was at 63 of them. And it just isn't the way it was, so I don't think it's...
And it's like you were covering the women's as well. You'd cover... Was juniors? Yeah. Was juniors covered a little bit as well, or started to get some coverage?
I never traveled with the juniors.
Not travel, but locally you might cover them. Or
I covered all the
stuff,
playoffs, yeah. I did. The curling beat was, you had to cover it all. We covered it a lot more than they do now.
Well, I was wondering, actually,
way more.
That was something I was going to ask you about later, but let's jump on it now.
I mean, you were in Winnipeg. You know how much Jack Madison and the Trib covered curling. Well, we used to do the same thing.
Well, yeah, it seems like now, the focus is on all the slams, and there's like the TVs behind it and all this, and there's lots of eyeballs that watch curling. I think we're struggling maybe with number of curlers that actually go and play the game, but we have an enormous amount of eyeballs on the sport. The numbers usually rival a lot of even Stanley Cup games, or they certainly, in Canada, it's phenomenal for the big events. But the question then is, what I've seen is the coverage of it in terms of the media, the sports media, which is expansive because there's all sorts of sports media now, right? It's not just local papers. You've got you've got all this, but yet the focus is always on traditional hockey year round, because we're in Canada. Yeah. Oddly, I find that curling gets the short shaft despite the amount of coverage. I mean, other amateur sports, or even somewhat professional sports, I think even get more coverage than curling does in this country, oddly enough, or certainly the same, yet they don't seem to equal the same number of fan interest. I don't. Why is that? What do you think it is? What's this?
Well,
is
I
there
give you a
stigma?
couple of reasons. I'm going to be stepping on some toes, but I give you a couple of reasons. Number one,
step away.
Nobody in the media knows anything about it. Like when I started in this business, I was a curler, or thought I was a curler, and curled all the time. Show me 5 guys in the whole Canadian media that cover or have curled. I mean, they just don't do it. And they don't push it either. It is not pushed by their bosses either, because their bosses, in most cases, sports editors and sports directors are not sports people.
Okay.
They're editors and journalist type people that have been put into a position where they're running a department. But really, they know about as much about baseball as the Blue Jay fans, and they think that the Blue Jays are the one and only thing in Toronto because everybody else does. And nobody's going to tell them any different. Mm-hmm. So it's a different era altogether. In that, when I noticed this, you could see this coming long ago. Is that I'll tell you when it started where it got me was at the Calgary Olympics. I went to, and we're getting away from curling a bit, but I spent the whole month of January in Europe that year, because we had the Olympics in 1988 in Calgary, and I had a whole month traveling in Europe, covering, you name it, bobsleigh, luge, figure skating, everything that was going on in Europe at that time. I went to one curling event in Switzerland. The whole month I was on the road. So I came back and I knew what was going on. And so I went into the office the first day back, and one of the early events in the Winter Olympics is the downhill, men's downhill. I wrote a piece saying who was going to win it. I said, this guy will win it, no question about it, and this is the reasons why and everything else. I'd seen him ski about 3 races in Europe. Story never made the paper.
Even though we're hosting the Olympics, and it's the downhill skiing, which is...
Like tomorrow is the downhill skiing. Some editor shelved it and ran a bunch of stuff about little kids running around having a good time or whatever. Kind of socializing stuff you see on TV all the time now. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I blew my stack. Why did I spend a whole month in Europe?
Yeah, why did they? Although I'm sure I'm sure it was a wonderful trip.
Oh, it was a hell of a trip.
Yeah.
But for my money, and you can talk to anybody else who was in the sports department at the time, they got butchered. I mean, as soon as the Olympics started, all these highfalutin editors from news side and all over the place were calling all the shots, and none of them knew anything about it. They were putting all their emphasis once they got going into the fluff and that kind of stuff. I spent half the whole Olympics either at the ski hill or somewhere, But
okay, so because you're a lifelong newsman, what's fluff? I want to get your so what when you say that, what's your perspective
what I would
of
say,
it? Because you've probably even written like a fluff piece or a puff piece, you call it.
But it's stuff about stuff you see in Facebook or something. It's a group will get together and have a nice little charity deal or something. I mean, I don't want to knock any of this. I try not.
You've probably written.
It's not my idea of news. That's all.
You've written those pieces, I'm sure, over time, right? You probably had to, right?
Yeah,
you had to.
Yeah, nothing compared to a guy who's going to win the Olympic downhill.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's not about. It's not related to what's actually going on in terms of covering the story.
Big features, about somebody's mother who's here with some athlete from somewhere or other, and this kind of stuff.
Well, the touching, heartwarming stories. There's always
which now take precedence over everything.
I thought now is more when somebody does something wrong, everybody pounces on it for 48 hours, and that's or somebody puts out the wrong tweet or and it just becomes let's pounce.
Because TV has taken over the whole deal, and back in those days, TV wasn't strong enough to. Yeah. They didn't have enough. We had 2 or 3 sports guys in town, but I mean radio and TV, but it's nothing like when now you've got CNN and all this stuff going on, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah. I don't want to date you, but CNN's been around since the late 1970s.
We didn't have it here.
No, probably you're right. The Canadians.
We didn't have it here.
I remember growing up in the prairies with 3 TV channels and the one French station. Yeah, I remember those days.
We never had it here.
Yeah, that's true. So, what was your first international curling? Then, how would that work? Would you say an Alberta team would win the Canadians? Would you go with them to the Worlds? That was it. So, which was your first? It
was
World Championships.
Well, the first one actually was when Calgary hosted it. The first 4 were in Scotland, and the first one outside of Scotland was in Calgary.
That's right. Okay, yeah, the first Scotch Cup was
Lyle
the first.
Lyle Dag represented Canada. It was a kind of a rinky-dink thing back then, you breezing through it without any trouble.
Was there attendance? What was live attendance?
They were playing it in the corral back then, so I mean that place was packed. That's about 6,000 seats, 6,000 people.
Well, that's still a good Brier Wednesday night these days. So
sometimes, yeah. Well, they got great coverage for that kind of thing. And then the next year, Northcott won his first Brier, so I went to wherever he went. I can't even remember now. I covered him at 3 of those. The first one was in Vancouver, actually. He won there, and then the second one he won was in Pointe Claire, Quebec, and the third one was in Scotland.
Yeah, this is well before '88. So was that your first trip across the pond?
Yes.
For at that point?
Yes.
So what was
that was '69. Curling-wise, as though he's a good friend of mine, but not that good a friend. But he did so much for the game back then. Wound up, in my opinion, helping to screw it up later. But
who's that?
Doug Maxwell. And thanks to him and Air Canada, I got to go to Europe 20 times before I actually bought a ticket. So
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna come back to Doug in a little bit. I want
put that.
Yeah.
Put that on. No, he. I can't complain. He did wonders for traveling, and we had some good times. But in the end, it didn't work out so good. And as a matter of fact, it's kind of the world is kind of the days of Air Canada will never be repeated.
No, you don't think so? Yeah.
No, not in terms of the fun show it was for all the people that flew in for it, and everything. A lot of people went to it. It was like a thing where all the fans would go to it. I think the closest thing to that may be what's happening at the Continental Cup in Las Vegas, in that people that want to go there and be part of the action. Well, it was like that with Air Canada, because they were tied into a travel agent in Toronto that had there were all kind of packages and everything.
Okay, so it
included banquets and cable car rides.
So they really promoted it like a yearly thing, and let's try to drag drive the attendance. And so no matter where this thing ends up, we're going to bring Canadians. Whether it's in Canada, we'll bring them from all over the country. If it's in Europe, we'll bring them fly them over. And by the way, let's put them on Air Canada.
Well, rightfully so.
Yeah.
But Air Canada would be crazy not to do that.
Yeah.
And Maxwell, who was actually the major domo of that thing, did a hell of a job of promoting it, alongside this travel agency which he was hooked into, by the way. But anyway, they did a hell of a job of it. Once they lost the sponsorship, they've got sponsors like Ford. It's a different ball game altogether now. It's not like this was like a party. There was banquets. There was things for, like, if you went to Germany, they had this.
So is it more like, because a Brier seems to have a lot of that, like create an atmosphere around it. So was it a little more like that? They try to take a Brier to a world event type of thing.
Who started all that? Mr. Hansen. It was as a result of what he learned at a few of those when he became the executive director of Brier and whatever he was. He started doing that same thing with turned the thing into a structured event rather than just a thing run by the CCA. So, but it was based on the same idea as Air Canada had with the Silver Broom, and it was a great idea. And those were the days. Now, getting back to your original question, back in those days, they got a lot of publicity out of it. And curling got a lot of publicity out of it because...
So when it moved from Scotch Cup into the World, it started to...
Once we got into Air Canada, because I was at every one of them, and I was sending stuff back, and Matheson went, and everybody went there, and they took, what's his name from the Gazette, Montreal. They took Neil Carl from the Toronto Star. There's a whole bunch of guys went every year. So I mean, the papers were full of this stuff.
So somewhere between the dinners and drinks and the entertaining, you'd find time to write a story. Is what you're saying? Somewhere in there, it was.
Or two.
Yeah. So Scotland was the first. So that was. Did it feel like the home of curling when you went? Like, was it kind of, or was it really not that nostalgic?
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah,
it's the home of golf for sure. It's the home of Scotch.
Yeah. But so you didn't go, and it didn't feel like this pilgrimage. As someone,
curling's not the same deal as golf or any of those things. No, it's not the same ball yard. But the people that were involved in it were great. And they had other type things going on, like the Broomhall Curling Club in Perth, Scotland. I haven't got my pin on, but I'm a member. And to get anointed as a member of this thing, you've got to go through this initiation, which literally scares the living daylights out of you.
Okay. And, can you share it with us, or is this some sort of top secret?
No.
Okay. So it's called Crossbones Society. Okay.
What's his name from Winnipeg? Bob Irving. He was in the same group that I was in. Anyway, there was a bunch of us. At about 10 o'clock at night, after the curling was over, they bussed us to some old castle out in the middle of nowhere somewhere. Anyway, it didn't have any electric lights. It was all torches. So we were in there, and we all sat around tables that looked like the whole thing looked like a setting from The Adventures of Robin Hood.
Yeah.
And it was all in this castle, and it was all flickering torches. And there was a whole slew of us there that night, and they took us in there, and I'd heard about this thing beforehand. And he said, "You better watch out for these Scots guys because they're crazy." And there were a bunch of old Scotsmen, and all this kind of stuff. You sit down at these wooden tables, and they immediately come around and you say, do you want Scotch or do you want, not brandy, but...
like a whiskey?
Cognac.
Cognac, okay.
Yeah. Scotch or cognac. And whichever one you choose, they slammed a liter of it in front of you.
A liter, okay.
And everybody had it, one or the other. And then they bring the stovies, and stovies are like this giant potato stew.
Okay.
Which is they have these big buckets of this stew. And the potatoes are all boiled down to practically nothing. It's like a potato stew with beef in it. And so everybody eats this stuff, and you got beautiful bread, and you're pouring. You got nothing to drink, but whether you were going to have the scotch or the cognac. When the time this was over, then they start with the Broom Hall Curling Club deal. All lights go off, number one, and then each Scotsman takes one of you. He's your leader.
Okay.
And they take you down to the basement of the castle, and they put you, and you're blindfolded, so you can't see anything.
And you've had a liter of scotch or cognac at this point.
You're working on
it. Yeah, you're still working on it. Okay.
Yeah. You are led into this, what is presumably, I found, later you go back and watch the other guys get suckered into the same thing, but to begin with, you don't know what it's all about. So you go in, and all of a sudden they suggested, no, watch it, Daddy, because you're going to be walking over glass, broken glass. And you start walking, and and you don't know what you're walking over, and you're tiptoeing around trying to find out what you're doing, and in and on, and it goes, and it's like an obstacle course for a blind man where he doesn't know what he's doing. And the climax of it is they put you in the penultimate climax is they put you in this great big tunnel, like a big tube, and then start banging away on top of this thing with bats and on. So you don't know what's going on. You're blindfolded. You don't know what's coming next. And then the coup de grace is they start sticking these tubes up your pant leg, and you don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it turns out it's liquid air. And when they let the liquid air go, you know what liquid air feels like?
No.
It's like ice.
I can honestly say I've never had liquid air shoved up my pant leg. No,
well,
that's not.
Never had
that's
it
not
either.
something I.
Anyway, it's like somebody filling your pants with ice, only it's air, and scaring the living daylights.
At that
you
point,
don't even know what the hell is going on. And once you come out, then they shake your hand and say, you're now a member of the Broom Hall Curling Club, and you go back up and have a couple more snorts up in the main room, and then you could go back down and watch the next poor sucker go through it. It was about a 40-minute deal.
And is this the extent of the responsibility once you remember? Is it each time you go back, you just get to go and watch other people do this? Or
yeah, you can. You can.
Is there other charitable things that this organization does, or is it?
I don't know. I think it's for crazy Scots to just get a kick out of this. There's a pin that goes with it, and there's a curling club and all this stuff. It's for curlers. But there was 2 members of the Canadian contingent that chickened out and wouldn't go. One was
You gonna name them?
Yeah, damn right I am. One of them was Terry Begin from Ottawa, and the other one was Marv Moss from Montreal Gazette. So when we, at 6 a.m., they're busing us back into the hotel. And of course, we've got a gang, and they're saying, where are these guys? We're blasted by this point, but we take them, and somebody goes and fills it. The station hotel in Perth is kind of like it's one of those, a bathroom every 4 or 5 rooms,
So it's shared bathroom. Yeah.
Including the bathtub. So we filled 2 or 3 bathtubs full of ice and water, and then we raided their rooms and pulled them out of bed and lugged them down the hall and threw them in the bloody bathtub. But this would have been like 6:30 in the morning.
Even though perhaps it was you guys were the ones that probably needed the ice in the bathtubs, and at that point,
I just needed a pillow. I needed a pillow by then. This thing. Eventually, it was. I can't remember how to. It was everybody had a liter of something. I had a liter of Martell's. Okay. I know that. I don't think I got a hectoliter of Scotch. Scotch is a nice, beautiful drink, but it's a sipping drink. So is that cognac.
Generally, when I've had it, if I have a liter of Scotch, it's usually in the bottle for a while, and I slowly pour it into a small glass. I don't usually have it in one large glass. That's kind of the way I remember it.
Yeah. But that was one of the fun things about international curling, and there was a lot of them back in those days. They built the sport around that, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's when it got all the publicity. That's when it had who was in that? That was the year that Bill Tetley and Bill. I'm trying to remember his name. The guy who played second, he's a great guy. We had some good times together. The guys are crazy, but most of those guys are.
Well, here's a question on that, because something I noticed about the current state of the game, and your friend Mr. Hansen maybe has something to do with this, or at least was helping try to transform the image of curling to an athletic, Olympic, focused on those things.
That's what he did focus.
When I grew up, a lot of the image around curling was the characters, and yes, alcohol was involved, and there was funny stories of really stupid behavior, or there was a legend and kind of the stories that would pass down from it. So I don't know, something in the modern game was almost missing that a little bit. And I even noticed this last year at the Ottawa Brier, where you didn't see as many teams show up in the patch, and there wasn't as much of that attitude around the game, which you can call it evolution, but I think there's also maybe something missing about that sort of just the everyman that a lot of these guys, I mean, they're amateurs, right? These are they're taking time out of their regular scheduled lives to focus on a game and try to be the best in the world at it, but they're just regular Joes and
they always
ladies.
Were, except that now there's one added factor in there. It's called OLYMPICS, and the whole game is aimed, the powers that be are partly to blame for this. The whole thing is aimed at getting a team to the Olympics and then doing something in the Olympics. And as far as I'm concerned, one of my best friends in my life is a guy named Ray Kingsmith, who was a big wheel here in curling. He was a hard-working type, a friend of mine and a friend of a lot of people. But he curled with me actually, but he was on the the administrative side, and he worked his ass off to get this thing going with the first Olympic Games here and the demo.
Because 88 was the first demonstration.
Demo. Yeah.
That's back when Eddie Wernich was supposed to lose weight, right?
Yeah, all that crazy stuff, yeah. That's actually, that Ed Wernich losing weight it started to turn this thing around. And maybe if a guy had been able to see this, ever since that Wernich thing, the game hasn't been as much fun since. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think the game has been as much. The events haven't been as much fun. It's been, but because everybody's trying to, there's much fewer teams because a lot of people just don't want to do what a guy like Kevin Cooley wants to do to get to these things, and
certainly part of it is the effort required now is becoming harder and harder for teams to reach that level. Whereas, I think there was back then, it was still a certain number of teams that were better than everybody else, but the gap was certainly smaller because it wasn't a year-round effort the way it is now. Right now, the focus is on these teams.
Because there was none of this slam stuff or any of this. There was a cash peel circuit of sorts, and a lot of the good teams played in it. But there was a lot more good teams back then than there is now, because there's not as many people that can afford to do what you have to do to get to this level. Yeah. And when you're playing in a Brier now, and you're trying to get to the Olympic trials
and the funding and all it, there's a lot on the table.
More sponsorships and everything else going on. It's a different deal.
I got to ask you that though, because I've always wondered that back in the 70s, and you had a car spiel, and back even in the 80s, I mean, they had some spiels that paid some pretty good dollars in like 1988, $86 that are relative to a spiel today are actually higher. Right? Maybe there were fewer of them, or maybe
there was more teams in them. I mean, that last big one in Edmonton had 64 teams in it. All the big car spiels had 64 teams.
I mean, there's no car spiels today, right? There's no bond spiel where a team's taking home, maybe the skins, but there's nothing else where someone's taking home $80,000 worth of...
You wouldn't get 64 teams in a spiel like that now, because there isn't 64 teams that could compete in it,
Well, I can't recall that. I tell you the story that I understood when I did some study on the playdowns. Last year, there were almost as many teams in the Ontario Grandmasters, which is over 70, I think, as there was in the men's playdowns. Wow. Almost as many to go to the Brier. So it was kind of interesting that the numbers are shifting.
Oh, they've been shifting for a long time. I mean, the year that we played in the city playdowns every year. I only got out of there once. The city playdowns, we have that 48-sheet Big Four building. they'd have to use it for 3 or 4 draws just to get everybody through the first round. There was over 100 teams in it.
Wow.
I mean, back in the Manitoba, I had 1,000 teams in the Manitoba Bonspiel back in those days, and there was just a lot more teams. Now, to get into you had 4 zones in Calgary. You had to win one of those 4 zones to even get out of town. There was 12 other zones in southern Alberta, and they were all rural. 16 teams played off another double knockout, this triple knockout at the southern Alberta level. Now, it's an open bonspiel, that southern Alberta thing, and they don't even have any senior city play downs anymore. So, I mean, there's now just an open southern Alberta bonspiel to see who gets into the provincials, rather than back in those days, there was over 100 teams trying to get 4 zones in the city. And that's the same in the women's and the same all the way along the line. There's just way more teams. Yeah. It was unbelievable.
So is the game better off or worse off, or it's just different?
It's to begin with, it's different. It's altogether different. You can't compare. Anybody who tries to tell you, well, is this guy better than Richardson, or is that guy better than Cooey, or whatever? I mean, they're playing a different game.
Different conditions.
It's a different game, different conditions, different ice, different everything, different time put into it, everything. It's just there's no comparison.
So do you enjoy watching it still?
Well,
I mean, you don't have to write about it. You're not covering it, so you haven't done that in ages. So,
well, yeah, up until 2 years ago, I did for the CCA. But even then, I used to watch it on TV in the press room. I never used to go in the iceberg on because it was too easy. You had to fill that sheet, so we were writing all the time. That's a good question. I think probably the older you get, you kind of lose a little oomph for it.
A charm that was there that just seems to,
Yeah.
And maybe it just becomes because it's been so many for. Okay, well, you got to probably say, and especially covering it around Alberta, late 80s, early 90s, sort of just before the free guard zone, as the conditions and the play started to move towards 2-1 and 3-2 hit contests.
That happened the 1 year.
What was that game like? That sport when you were you still kind of covering it?
It's funny that year, because that was the year the Flames went to the Stanley Cup and won it, and I can't remember seeing a lot of curling. Although I did go to the Brier, it was in Saskatoon, but that was the year they had that 3-2 game with Ryan and
Folk. Yeah.
I saw that. I was there for that, but I didn't have as much. I was a columnist then. There was a period in there where I was the senior sports columnist, and I had to do a lot more things than cover curling. So the only things I did for curling were I did to go to the Brier and the big events, and I didn't write about it. Curling. I wrote some curling. I probably wrote more curling columns than any other sports columnist ever did.
Yeah. Let's do some name association.
Okay.
You want to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Well, okay, let's talk on Doug Maxwell.
Yep.
So
I told you what I felt about him. I think he responsible for moving this game forward in a lot of areas, particularly the World Championships, which I think have stalled since he got out of it. Actually,
was he
He was a media
very
guy
hardworking
turned
guy.
Promoter.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a media guy turned promoter, and he did a good job of promoting it.
So he had a lot of character. He's a guy that could kind of sway a room type thing. He'd walk in and
yes, but not in a humorous character sort of way, but he had the media that way. He sounded like a there's not very many media guys that sound like that. He had the media voice, and sounded like a media guy. But what he did behind the scenes to promote this thing for, mind you, I'm sure he was getting paid for it. I don't know what he was getting paid, but he was their director, Air Canada. Up until the time that they crossed swords, the thing was the best event that,
So what do you mean cross swords? So what was the...
Well, you've never heard this story?
I'm sure you tell it better than I understand it.
A lot of it's hearsay, even to me, although I know it from the Canadian Curling Association end of it. But there were a couple of stories where you're in a place, we'll not name the place or anything like that, but you're in a place like, say, Switzerland. 2 big 747s are coming in at the same time. The Air Canada 747 is coughing all the people off the plane that are there on a freebie, like me and a whole bunch of other officials and everything else. And Swiss Air is coughing off all the paid customers on the other airplane. Well, it was somebody from Air Canada happened to notice this. And that's when the first problem started for the Silver Broom. And I think, hearsay again, Maxwell heard about it. And that started the swoon for something that had started in 1968 and until 1981.
Yeah, early, yeah.
And then it started to fall apart after that because Air Canada... Now, another part of the problem is the same thing as I was telling you about media. The people that were people that were sold on this in 1968, the big wheels in Air Canada, they ain't around anymore.
They started to move on. And
now there's guys that they're saying, what are we doing covering it? What are we doing spending all this money on a curling event? And as soon as something like this happens and somebody reports that their plane's full of freebies and Swiss Air has got all the paying
customers, yeah.
I mean,
yeah. And so all of a sudden
deadly.
Now, so if there's a guy there involved that says, I want to kill this curling stuff, now he's got the ammunition.
That's right.
And can make it happen.
That's right. And it was 5 years of the making,
the Scotties is pretty phenomenal when you think about the amount of how long that's gone on in a sponsorship. I mean, that's
for the most part,
incredible.
You have to give Robin Wilson a lot of credit because she has managed to stick handle her way past a couple of big wheels that, Scott actually became Kruger.
Yeah.
And so when Kruger took over, she had to stick handle her way around. She's been the PR person. She had a contract for that from day one. And she had to stick handle her way around some people that probably were thinking the same thing in Kruger, but they've still got it going.
And you look at it it's one of the few sports where the women draw as many eyeballs and in some cases more than the men do. You know, that's not common in most sports. I mean, maybe tennis, women's tennis is up there, but I mean, you look at the Brier finals and the Scotties finals are pretty. No, but it's interesting. The Brier finals and the Scotties finals get almost the same numbers. Yep. Right? We're not in certain Scotties games sometimes, but depending on who's playing, the draws will be higher than the Brier. That doesn't happen. The women's NBA doesn't get that kind of coverage compared to the NBA.
The Scotties, some of the Scotties games are more exciting than the Brier. They're not as perfect. And I'm looking at it now as a guy who's just sitting there to be entertained. I think a lot of people watch the Scotties because there are some misses that aren't expected, and then some great shots that maybe aren't expected either. And plus the fact they're way better looking than we are anyway. But you know what I mean? You put those three together, and there's definitely
We only got to Doug. I got all these names here. We gotta move through these.
Fire ahead. You can edit it later.
All right, that's true. Believe me, we will. This thing will run for hours, so we're good. Ron Northcott. So you mentioned Ron. He was beating a lot of people.
He lives here in town. Yeah,
in your era. So
won 3 World Championships.
Was he a good interview? Was he?
Yes, and he was. I think he was from my standpoint. But he's one of these guys that I followed him because he was the hometown guy, and you get a rapport with the hometown guy. It's like the Dodger beat guy talking to the Dodgers as opposed to the Giants. It's easier for me to interview Northcott than it is to interview anybody else. So you have to, as a media guy, and I think it's totally up to the media. It's not up to the people that are being interviewed, is to be able to adjust to that. So you can get other people to talk to you as much as the people that you're comfortable with. No, he was, Ron was fine. There were some tough interviews, but maybe he'll strike on one here. But I've run into a lot of tough interviews, a lot of them in hockey dressing rooms.
Those are more the tougher ones, yeah?
Can't get him to say anything.
Were there some tough interviews on the curling front? Were there guys that would avoid you or even just had animosity about the press? Or for the most part, curlers are known as a very kind of accommodating bunch, I think.
I think so.
Because a lot of these are, they're doctors and farmers and whatnot.
But the whole thing has changed. Yeah. So they wouldn't know what it was like in the days when I was
but that's why you're here. I'm asking you about back in the day.
Now it's a scrum. Everything's a scrum. Nobody gets to talk one-on-one to anybody in anything anymore, unless you make some kind of a deal with somebody's agent. That's the only way you can talk one-on-one to anybody. Otherwise, it's a scrum, and I get the same quotes you get and everybody else gets. Okay, so...
All right. So we're going over names here.
Okay. So Northcott.
So Ron Northcott.
Was a very classy guy. He
Still is a classy guy, I assume, right?
You know, curling is full of these guys, and they're all classy, but they're different kind of classy, you know? Like, I never did understand why they called him the Owl. Even though he wore horn-rimmed glasses, he never struck me as an owl type of guy. He struck me more as he's very quiet, very, well, to a certain extent, he was a bit professorial when he was, in terms of his thinking. He was a gambler, more of a gambler than you would think. I mean, he played against Gervais all the time, and Gervais was the biggest gambler I ever saw on a tee head. But Ron wasn't far behind. You know, well, it's a different game again, so you can't compare. But I mean, you know, those two guys on the tee head had some of the greatest thinking man's matches you've ever seen.
And there was no free guard zone, and, you know, conditions created the environment, but I'm sure there were still teams that like to try to keep it simple or not get into too much trouble. And there were other
Saskatchewan teams.
Yeah.
No, there was no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It didn't matter who came out of Saskatchewan, not even after the Richardson and Pee Wee and Garnett eras, they were still playing the same way in Saskatchewan. And part of the reason I decided one time when we were there at a Bonspiel was because the ice was so keen and so straight that nobody wanted to take a chance on doing other than the hit all the time. And that's what they did in Saskatchewan for that whole period. They were great hitters. I mean, nobody could hit better than Garnet Campbell. You know, that's all he did was hit.
So in Alberta at the time, was there similar teams to that structure, and was it just the guys like Heck and Ron and that were?
There was lots of guys who would play that hit, but they never won because they were always. Northcott and Hector would fashion their game around as soon as you dropped a guard, they were in behind it. Yeah. And every end turned out to be a junk fest. You know, every end. I mean, they rarely, on occasion, they would surprise you and play an open end. But depending on who they were playing with, I mean, both of those guys had the same team for years, so they knew exactly what these guys could do and what they couldn't do. And Northcott had by far the best sweeping of anybody, you know.
And that, I mean, just as it kind of does, I think, today, but even maybe more so then, that having great sweeping and guys that could play, you know, and we're talking about, is that still 12 ends? That's 12 ends, right?
It was 12 ends until
the early 70s, right?
I have to think back. It would be 12 ends until 1974. Yeah.
And in some of these events, you might play 3 draws a day. You're talking about.
Yeah, that was one of the big deals.
That's a lot of work. And if you don't have 2 horses that can really help put your rocks where you want them. I think sometimes the perception is that the push brooms are, you know, much more capable in terms of directing and putting rocks into very specific locations, even more so last year. But in truth, the corn broom, I mean, that was still an ability, right? Within the corn broom era. I mean,
well, with a real good sweeper. I mean, I think that Fred Story was probably the best corn broom sweeper I ever saw at judging the weight of a running stone as it was coming down the ice. He knew exactly. You know, nobody had to say sweep. I mean, he knew when it needed it and when he didn't, and he was the.
It didn't look at a stopwatch either.
No,
most likely.
No. You know, another guy's the second best pair I think I saw. I don't know, there were one of them, but Brian Wood and Jim Pettipies were really good too. They were really good sweepers. But I think Story and Sparks were unexcelled as sweepers.
So it was. I mean, it was an advantage.
They made a lot of shots for Northcott. Yeah, there's no question about it. That's the way he skipped. So he'd have to throw those kind of shots.
So Matt Baldwin.
Well, Baldwin is just a character. I mean, you talk about characters back in the days when curling was for characters. This one would be leading the league. I mean, he'd only been out of university 2 or 3 years, I guess. Then he got into the curling, and I'm trying to keep this story short. Anyway, he.
Why? You can, or are you just trying to? No, there's a lot of. Or are you just trying to keep it politically correct? And
no. But there's a lot of stories about him that I can't remember the punchlines or remember some of them. But what I'm saying is there's all kinds of Matt Baldwin stories.
Yeah.
but the one about the train going to after he won the Brier in 1954 at home, and then he lost the next year. I think he lost in Edmonton actually, and then the next year. He won again, and this was the year of the Brier train to Moncton, where this train started in Vancouver and went all the way across the country, picking these guys up all the way across. You know, well, that year. There was Billy Walsh from Winnipeg. I mean, he wasn't going to he's not much of a party guy.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
and so on and so forth. The rest of them are having a hell of a time, I guess. Anyway, I don't know. I wasn't at that Brier. But to tell you what happened, I mean, Baldwin was awful, and so was everybody else. And it was Billy Walsh against Alfie Phillips Jr.'s old man playing in the final. So, I mean, you know, these guys were old curlers. The next year he went back there again, and he kind of learned some lessons about that train, because this time it was in Moncton, and he swept the field and played pretty well.
In Moncton or in Kingston?
In Kingston the next year.
Yeah.
Did I say Moncton? Yeah, Moncton was the year that...
So Kingston not as far as Moncton and learned to pace himself.
Yep,
and
I guess so.
Yeah.
But he was much better. And then he was pretty good in Victoria as well, although they had to go an extra end to beat those kids. That was the year that Bronstein and those kids they'd been in high school playdowns. That's what sparked that whole fiasco about you can't do this, because they were in high school playdowns.
We'll talk about
juniors.
So was that even nationally that become and you used the term fiasco? Did it kind of put people's back up a little bit?
There was no rule for it. There was no rule for it, and all of a sudden here you've got these kids, you know.
And this is in an era when kids should be seen and not heard, right? We're talking about
they were other than Turnbull, they were pretty classy kids.
So in other words,
Terry's a classy guy. So
there were still probably some of the old guard that thought, you know, why we got a bunch of kids in a man's event. I mean, this is the McDonald Brier, sponsored by tobacco. Yeah, this is
it was a natural thing for them to think, you know. And the bottom line is nobody had ever thought of it before to make a rule on it.
Because no one ever thought a team would be good enough to...
Not a high school team, no. Yeah, it's one of those things where I could criticize all day about how the game is run. But I mean, there's a lot of rules that need to be put into place, and they seem to be put into place after the fact instead of before the fact. And this was one of them. As it turned out, Baldwin beat him, but it was a tight game, and Baldwin was sick in that game too. But he still beat them. But it was a good game, and then Baldwin started having a few problems, and 2 years later, he joined forces with Hector, who, if you weren't from Edmonton, I'd never even heard of Hector before. He was known in Edmonton, mind you. That team was kind of a strange combination, but Hector was not a third man, and neither is Baldwin. So, I mean, now you've got two skips. One of them is playing third. Both of them are gamblers. Both of them are used to calling shots, and they didn't beat the guys from down here. And,
it doesn't usually work out too well when you try with that structure. So what was Heck like then? So
Hector was a big. He was a gambler, both on and off the ice. He liked to play cards and spent a lot of time between games and in the hotel room playing crib with people, and mainly Don Fleming of the Edmonton Journal. And they used to. He was a really gambler type skip, gambler in a different sort of way than Northcott was, but he didn't. I don't think he ever had quite as strong a team with him as Northcott did. He had some good. His third was as good as anybody. That's the thing. Northcott had different thirds every time, whereas he had Ron Anton, and Ron Anton was a great player. I knew him when he was in Medicine Hat curling in high school, but the front ends weren't as good, I don't think, as Northcott's front ends. Anyway, they had some great contests over the course of the 60s. Every year, practically, they were in the final. Hector was an interesting sort of a guy, rather quiet. Not one of the great interviews of all time. He didn't waste a lot of time talking.
Because, I mean, just from looking at clips or kind of seeing, photographs, and, I grew up in Manitoba, so I don't really know the history with Hector, but he seemed like he would have a presence, but really he was more of a soft, gentle giant almost, a little bit? Or?
Yeah, that's what they called him. They called him the friendly giant. But, he wasn't, you had to get a tooth extractor sometime to get too much out of him. Yeah. The answers would be quite glib usually, but a great guy.
So Eddie Lukowich.
Well, Eddie's the kind of a guy that when I first saw him was about 75, 76. And he still was kind of a skip who would be skipping, playing, making what most people would think were stupid calls, figuring that you can make everything, rather than playing the conservative, the odds-on shot. he would be playing some, I don't know whether you call it gambling or not, but it wasn't gambling based on what he had with him and what he had then himself. He was a smooth thrower, but he wasn't as good then as he was 2 or 3 years later. And after that, up until for the next 10 years, he was as good a thrower as there was in the game. I don't know this, and he'd be interested to hear me say so, but I think sometimes he'd get a little intimidated by the wrench, just because of the way the wrench swaggered around and everything else. But there's no comparison between the way the two, you sit there watching those two play, and you wonder, how come the wrench is in the same building the way he throws a rock compared to, but the wrench intimidated a lot of people.
There's often been, and you talked a bit about it before, I mean, there's often been skips who don't necessarily look the best when they throw it, but because they're the skip, they know where it's going. Yep. I've talked to some guys like that where they say, if I'm not skipping, I don't know if the other guy is going to be able to tell what I'm trying to do based on where.
There's a few people like that, and they have to skip because they can't play. Mind you, Wrench played for Savage, and he played for that group. Kind of got together, and they all played with each other over the years. And Wrench, it was always a good talker, always a good interview. Yeah. I found him a little bit. I couldn't get used to the fact that he wasn't that serious about anything until all of a sudden he started to win, and then all of a sudden I realized this guy's serious. He's just not letting me know about it.
He's just hiding it. Yeah. So he can kind of always good with a joke or a smile and something.
And very friendly. Hell of a friendly guy.
Well, okay. So while we just touched on the wrench, I'm going to bring up another name because they obviously had a relationship. Maybe you're familiar with it. So Warren Hansen.
Well, Warren Hansen's a different bird than any of these guys. He's a driven man, and he found out once he got into the teaching end of it and got out of what he was doing before that and got into curling full time, which was early in the 70s. He was the kind of a guy who he loved the game, and he played second for Gervais in that Brier. He'd been playing with a lot of good players in Edmonton. Wayne McElroy played third for him. He played with Doc Mitchell, with a number of them. Anyway, but he's a driven sort. He's one of those guys that's intense sort of person, and he's driven. And he got involved in the game to the point where he could see that they weren't taking advantage of what you had here. What the game had to offer wasn't there. And he decided back in the 70s that he was going to make it better.
So that far back was when he started having an image?
In the first part of the 70s, yeah. Yeah, probably right after the Brier and right after the disappointment in Switzerland, where Hector couldn't make a shot and he couldn't figure out the rocks and he couldn't figure out the ice. He couldn't figure out anything. Suddenly, if you got a skip that doesn't have any of those things going for him and he plays the way Hector does, you're not going to win too many. But anyway, you could tell if you ever saw Warren sweep. That's all you need to know about the kind of a guy he is. He just puts his head down and just pounds, and he'd be going into the next century doing the same thing. He's a driven guy. And he decided that this is what he was going to do. Hence, you've got things like uniforms and curling. You've got things like no more smoking, on and on and on it goes. All kinds of things that he was actually responsible for, either getting rid of or putting into the game.
Or trying to shift the image.
Yeah, and trying to boost the image
to create
into something
a sport, a true kind of recognized athletic sport.
Yes,
which to a large extent, I think we've gotten to, and he's a big part of that.
I think he was a number one part of it.
Yeah, do you even have these conversations with him back in this back when this was on his mind, or just retroactively?
Well, he used to say that kind of thing, but that would be at about the time.
Did you ever have a chuckle over it and say,
Well, I didn't know him that well to begin with. He's from Edmonton, I was from here. Right? So, and I became when I got the job as the senior sports columnist, and I mean, it's all sports columnist in 78, all of a sudden I wasn't as close to that curling scene for about 10 years because I was busy with Olympics and football and hockey and every other damn thing that was going on, know.
And that's really when he started to take hold in the CCA and start to kind of shift things, and which then kind of led up to that 88 Olympics, which we talked about earlier.
I went to the Briers most of the time, and I also was what they called their historian at that time, which was kind of a statistical guy who I did.
But didn't you say earlier that you failed math 3 times? Or that was... And they put you in charge of stats.
No algebra.
So wait, I was going to say, they put you in charge of stats. So right away, maybe that's a deficiency in the CCA in recognizing the skills of its employees and its,
There's no
its
algebra
contributors.
in stats.
Well, there is now, but that's...
Is there? Well, I don't know about it.
Yeah. So it leads up to where we get into this 88 Olympics, which was happened here in Calgary.
That came up over a period of time. I was doing a lot of things.
I kind of saw it too. As I was coming up as a junior at the time, you had two competing forces in the sport. You had Eddie Wernick, who is the colorful character representing sort of the history of the game, and then you had someone like Warren, who, for better or for worse, sort of got painted as the bad guy who's trying to create a different image and saying we need to have athletes, we need people to meet certain, athletic requirements to become. We're going to try and create a super team. I think a lot of people.
That super team idea was a mistake.
Well, I think that was short-sighted thinking at the time, and probably people would.
Well, they proved
back at it. Yeah,
they proved it in the Olympic trials to go to the Calgary Olympics. They had 2 teams handpicked and 4 teams or 7 teams, 5 teams, legitimate teams, and 2 other teams handpicked, and then 2 teams handpicked finished last. So I mean, I was critical. Actually, I was critical of that thing. I didn't like that.
Well, I was going to wonder, what was your involvement at the time, and how much were you close to what was kind of happening, given that it was in Calgary and given that it was curling?
Well, as much as I could, but we got a National Hockey League team and the CFL and all this other going on.
The Flames used to be good
but
back
I used
then.
to be
from what I
critical
recall.
of some of their moves.
Yeah.
Yes, they were. That was back in the days when nobody knew of anything but the Oilers were in the league, and they were a good team.
But in terms of the story that kind of built out around Eddie and Warren
it was blowing up more in the East than it was around here.
You think so?
Yeah. Well, it was the kind of a story that'd be perfect to blow up, but I think probably Warren Hansen has endured far more criticism. We were talking about criticism in the game than anybody else I know.
So fairly?
Undeserved.
Fairly or
undeserved?
Undeserved.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly, if you think about the modern era of curling...
There wouldn't be a modern era of curling without him.
Clearly. I mean, he's and I think in any sport, in any capacity of business or industry, politics, when you have someone who's a builder, they have to be what you talked about, that you have to be a driver. You have to have your head down. You have to be pounding the ice without looking up, because the minute you look up, take that criticism, decide that you're going to shift decision-making based on what oththers say. Warren would probably be the first to admit, I've made a few mistakes. You're going to make mistakes.
Sure you are. You're putting it in the terms I couldn't think of improving on. You're absolutely right. He's just a driven person. I can't say that he was sometimes a hard guy to put up with sometimes. Yeah, but that's the way he was. And I'm as close to him as anybody that was in that era. And some there was times when but he was.
Larry, you wouldn't say you're someone that's going to hold back at times, right? To respond as you're going to tell people what you think usually.
I think that's probably the truth. That's how you get to be a columnist. Or back in those days, you did. I mean, I used to make all kinds of enemies.
So while we're on the topic of Warren in particular, so what's your impression and opinion of the CCA, of what's now Curl Canada, and its position in the game and in the sport? And
not much.
Okay, because you've been involved with them through some of your association and things like that.
I don't like the whole way that the CCA is structured. I don't like the structure. It's run by essentially 5 men and 5 women on a board of directors, most of whom, I will say, are not really in it to... there are exceptions. Mm-hmm. There are really good people that have been on the CCA, and there are a bunch of people that just seem to be kind of there, and they are the ones that decide who is going to be their director in chief. And I don't think they've, in my memory, I'm still waiting to see them pick one that was worthy of the job. As far as I'm concerned, I haven't thought any of them have been up to it. Why wouldn't they pick, like we were talking before? Why wouldn't they get somebody like a real curling type like Ann
Merklinger?
Ann Merklinger, yeah. Now she's had all the experience in sport and everything else. Why wouldn't they try and get her? These other guys that they've had they're brutal for my mind.
Well, so it's interesting that you say that in some respects Warren's been unfairly criticized at times, but I think a lot of times, and maybe you can clear this up for people, that people see Warren as synonymous with the CCA. And that somehow he's some puppet master that pulls strings that sort of drives the behavior of the CCA. But that's not really the case. And I think
it's not the case. As a matter of fact, he was just a employee. It just so happened that he was the employee who was doing all the work and was in charge of just about everything that made money and everything that raised the game.
And he made money, and he did a good job of making money and creating the events, for sure.
And everything that improved the game. There's a bill. I think I can't say this for sure because I don't know about it. But it seems to me there's always been other than Warren, there's always been a power struggle down there as to among a bunch of people that none of them should even be there. In my way of thinking, excluding a couple like Jerry's all right. He knows what he's doing. Although,
let's not
get into that.
I imagine it's pretty similar to a lot of political organizations in amateurs.
It's not easy. No, if you don't have a guy like Warren in an organization like that, you'd have a bunch of, you've been in organizations. You know how many people you've worked for people like, what is he doing here?
Well, and I also think if you look, with a lot of the conflict that happened back in 2000, 2001, 2002, the idea that the players themselves can also separately create their own entity doesn't necessarily come without struggles and come without politics. And, we're talking about guys who were competitors for years, and, there's lots of stories about how
some of them did and some of them didn't.
And guys didn't agree with each other. And I think with something now like some organization stepping in, I think it helps the game, but it's reached a different place for certain.
Oh yeah. The game's altogether different. It's more star oriented, and there's less people, and there's less people playing the game.
I know you mentioned it's star oriented, but
they're all stars. There's not a lot of guys that can't win playing. Let's face it. Why would they play?
But some of it is the stars are there, but the question is the character as much there, right? Is where's the Eddie Wernick, that type of, and I don't know if that's just because we're waiting to see those kind of characters, and it's fine. Not every sport goes through its cycle, and it's not a responsibility of these guys to be characters necessarily. It's their focus is to win and be successful.
Well, let me ask you this as an answer to that. Who do you know who's ever won an Olympic medal with a character?
That's true. Eddie the Eagle did not win a gold medal, but not even close. Did you cover Eddie when he was? He was here, of course. Yeah,
in Calgary. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're right. Sometimes the characters aren't the winners.
No, well, no, they're too busy driven.
Yeah,
there are guys like Hansen. They're driven, but they're not. The characters are in it for more. They want to. It's more of a balance between enjoying the game and fun
and enjoying the time there. Yeah,
and that's where I think maybe the game is missing a little bit because there isn't enough of those other guys around anymore.
So it's on that topic. So Paul Gausel.
Well, Gausel was he's back in the old days. He's not now. Gausel, I don't know what Gausel be. The kind of a guy he was. I don't know how he'd fit into today's. Yeah. I don't think he would have made the. I think he would have got drummed out along with Wernick in the Olympic trials. But
so you'd have been here. You'd have been covered. You were covered curling at the time when he was coming up through junior.
Yeah. He's a different bird. I'll tell you. He's grown up a lot. He's a different person now. He's much. He's got. I'll tell you, he's still as opinionated as ever, except that. He's probably got rid of some of the funny stuff he used to indulge in, and he's more into the normal with everybody else.
So when Paul was coming up, so what was the because it was a clash, right? You had young, long-haired. We're talking about an era when still a lot of the curlers looked like they were right out of a 1958 movie with the crew cut haircuts and the sideburns. Was this an era where he was, when he came up, was there just Gausel and no one else, or was it really,
the second man, Jackson, had a long hair too. I don't know. There was certain kids, and long-haired kids and everything, but he just happened to be red-haired. So all of a sudden he looked like and it was, plus the fact his personality was right out of left field. Like he didn't, and if you ever met his dad, you wouldn't believe it. I mean, his dad was the most unassuming, quiet guy you ever met. You wouldn't believe that this was his kid. But I mean...
So were people
I've never been able to, actually, he wasn't around long enough for me to, we went into that Brier in Calgary, and the first part of the week, those guys were the best thing going. And then they just kind of faded away, and Hackner and Volk beat them. But I mean, he was a tough guy to explain, tough guy to figure out. He really was. Did
everyone take it as being colorful and interesting, or were there some of the old guard that found it kind of unruly? And
there was probably a few of both. I think most of the guys that played against him respected for him the way he played. I'm not sure that they all figured that he wasn't high on something, but whether he'd have passed a dope test or not, I don't know.
They were going to respect his game, even if they didn't understand his approach or his lifestyle or his
I find it tough
philosophy.
to answer questions about him because I just never figured him out. I was a gung-ho reporter in those days, and he was just a kid, and I couldn't figure out what's with this guy. But he kept winning, and now you talk to a guy who played with him all those years, might give you better insight into the whole thing.
But interesting then that they didn't finish it well at that Brier, but they must have thought, oh, we're going to be we're young, this is not a big deal, we'll be back. And oddly enough, that just never
I think that's so. Yeah. Because they were such different people. I mean, Houston was a kid like everybody else, and Jackson was another long-haired guy, and the lead was just a young kid, and Houston and joined up with John Ferguson, and eventually they wound up with Lukowich almost right away. Neil said, enough is enough with this ridiculousness. I guess there was... he's the only guy, it's all hearsay, but he's the only guy that could really tell you what's going on. But Houston and Gausel are like those two colors on the bed there, black and white. Like they're so different, it's ridiculous. And yet they played together and
made it work.
Yeah.
So one last. Well, I could always do a couple. Depends how much longer you want to go and how many parts we make this out to. Terry Jones.
You're talking about media Terry Jones.
Yeah, sure.
Well, he's one of my best friends. So, I mean, if you think I'm going to tell you...
You don't have to tell me the really good stories, but what's the best Terry Jones story you can tell us?
I think probably the best Terry Jones story that comes to mind without talking about it too much is we're driving from Germany to Italy. We're going to cover a ski race in Cortina, and we're on our way to the Olympics in Sarajevo, and that would be 74. And we got up real early in the morning. We'd driven, and we were at some little town in the north of Italy. And we knew we weren't going to make it in time for the training run at the hill. It was a Podborski, and those guys were skiing. He said, let's stop and have breakfast in this nice little place on the side of the hill looking out over this beautiful valley. And so we walk in there, and Brian Dance, do you know Brian Dance? He's a CBC guy. He was with us. Anyway, we sit down, and we're this Italian waitress comes up, and yes, going to take your order, and Jonesy says, I'm going to have 6 strips of bacon, blacken them. 3 eggs, over and out, hash browns, and 3 Cokes. And we're sitting there like, this is for breakfast.
Yeah.
You should have seen the eyeballs of this little Italian woman were practically coming out of her head. She couldn't believe this. Only Jonesy would order something like that, Couldn't believe it. I never forgot that story. I keep needing him all the time.
When did he? So he came up. He's of course
part of the curling game.
The curling, yeah. I mean,
he's relatively new to it. I think he caught on with it. We've been friends forever. I think he
even
just decided. I think I better find out what he's doing because then once he found out how much fun it was. He's the road trip guy to end all road trip guys. So when he goes to a road trip, he wants to have a good time.
It's a good thing they don't have a train anymore to the Brier.
He wouldn't be alive today, I don't think. Anyway, no, but he has enjoyed it. He's enjoyed it. I don't think he really realized what curling was. Mind you, when he first got in at the Journal, before he went over to the Sun, Don Fleming had the beat covered 9 ways to
Don
Sunday.
Fleming, who wasn't it Don that actually he invented the? Is it Don that invented the scorekeeping? No, who's the guy?
Well, yeah. He and
the scorekeeping model.
I got it from him, and then he and I used it all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, but
he gets credit for it though.
Don did it before I did.
Okay. Yeah.
I kind of.
We could still modernize it a little bit more. The whole 4-point. The 4-point. I'm talking about the 4-point system on a shot and whether you've made it or not.
Yeah. I put some different things on it than what he was doing. He wasn't so interested in the specifics as I was, and I made it a little more specific, but I wasn't nearly as specific as what they're doing with it now.
Starting to do now. Yeah.
I think they get to. Well, that's right. Because
could still be improved. Yeah.
And it depends on who's scoring. But one thing, and then the other thing is sometimes it really doesn't reflect a hell of a lot. So it depends, But we used it for one reason and one reason only. It filled space. I could mention statistics and mention it in the story, and it was another interesting angle to the story. Otherwise, didn't mean anything as far as I was concerned.
Some other way to write about it, so you can add a line that so and so had shot.
Dave Biddleack had 100% curling game, first one I ever saw, I think.
So that somebody can read that and go, "Gee, I wonder what that means." Well, it's got to be good. 100%. I know 100% is good. So if it's 95, that's good, and if it's 85, I guess.
I always used to call it shot making. I didn't call it percentages. I called it shot making. Stats show that so and so was scored.
So you did get better at math. You did get better at math then.
90%. But no, the only thing that killed me was grade 12 algebra.
Who did I miss? You were associated with the Brier and
I'll tell you who Northcott thinks is the best shot maker he's ever seen, and it's none of these guys. In his era, he says the best curler was Pee Wee Pickering. And he says that now, and he'll always say that. And if you asked him today, he'd say that. And Pee Wee was a different sort of an animal again, but he was actually a friendlier type of guy than a lot of them. He was a farmer. He had the highest backswing of anybody I've ever seen throw a curling rock. And how the hell he controlled it is beyond me. It was almost like a guy getting pulled down the ice by a rock.
And he wasn't that big a guy to be able to do that either, right?
No, he wasn't. He was skinny. Very, very friendly guy. He was a really nice guy and made some shots that you would, after you watch him throw, you wouldn't believe. How does he make these damn things? But Northcott said of all the guys he ever played, this guy made more shots than anybody he'd ever played against. And he said he just couldn't believe how many shots this guy would be making against them. But I guess, he skipped and Garnett played third, or sometimes he played second. So, and Garnett had been around forever. So they knew something that the rest of us didn't know. But Pee Wee was one hell of a shot, Smith, I'll tell you. Yeah. He was a hell of a curler. And yet, he didn't win anything. He didn't win anything. Another guy who was even smoother, was the smoothest thrower, and didn't win anything, was Merv Mann. He was a fantastic curler. He couldn't win anything except car bond spiels and cash bond spiels and all that stuff. Yeah,
which today isn't considered a bad thing.
No, it isn't a bad thing. But just you put him into a Brier play down and he can't win. Well, he could never get by one Movalad or two Richardson. He couldn't get by one or the other. But it was crazy.
So we've chatted a lot about the Brier. We chatted a little bit about the Scotties. So what was the evolution of the women's game? I mean, I'm assuming when you were covering curling, you covered all of it, and how that kind of evolved in Alberta in the day. And
I think Sandra probably changed that whole game around. Before Sandra, or maybe a few years before. Maybe I'm being a little too far back. Maybe. Well, Colleen, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Colleen. But you're saying so,
Colleen. Before Colleen, there were a bunch of people that there were some good curlers. I mean, Susan Seitz was a hell of a curler, but she only got there once. There was single curlers, but teams. It really became a strong team thing. Peaser had. It wasn't even a contest when she played. Mm-hmm. If she's in it, she'll win it. Type of thing, back in those days, everybody, all the other women in it they looked like a bunch of housewives, and this team came out of the University of Saskatchewan and looked like athletes, and it wasn't really much
focused
of a
on the game and really driven.
Yeah.
At the time, did the women's game get any coverage comparable to the men's and the Brier as an example? No.
Well, we gave it a ton of coverage the year it was in Calgary. That was in 1970. That was the year Dorinda Chanel's won it, and she's now Dorinda Bailey. They were a nice team, young team. Saskatchewan, but Saskatchewan seemed to be winning every year. I mean, Saskatchewan were way out in front in women's curling, and the other women seemed to be. I think Saskatchewan kind of realized it was more of an athletic sport than anybody else did for a while. I would say, and maybe it was because of Peaser, I don't know, or Joyce McKee, those girls all played together and
just started to build a culture
athletes.
there. And
yeah. Well, they were
build a winning
I would say at the end of
environment.
End of maybe 1975, Saskatchewan had won so many more women's championships than any other province. It was a joke. They've started to catch up. They're catching up now. I mean, Colleen was. She was the year she won her first one. She was crazy. I mean, she was like Gauzel almost. In 1982. She won a lot of titles, but I'll tell you, I don't know whether it was something to do with intimidation or what, because she wasn't like a Jennifer Jones or her teams were not like, they were nice people. There's not a nicer person on earth than her third. They didn't exude the same kind of, but they won all the time. So I mean,
they seem to raise their game at the right time.
Yeah,
in the moment.
Yeah, and always,
even though they didn't get the same,
lose 3 or 4 games during the week, but they're always there at the end. I mean, they had. I think she won about 4 titles and probably lost 4 games in 3 of them. But still won the championship.
You're fully retired. You were doing that, the writing on the Tankard Times
for CC, well, we did all the championships.
For how many? Well, you were doing it.
We started it in 1990 in Sault Ste. Marie at the Brier. The year that Wrench won, we did the Tankard Times right through. Well, they're still doing it. I think the only reason that we did it in the first place, and the reason that we continue to do it, and probably still should be continued for a few more years, is that everybody in the stands is my age, and they're used to reading newspapers, and they loved it. I mean, curling is a game that all the people that watch it are my age, or maybe a little younger.
Yeah. Well, some are a little older, and some aren't there anymore, and that's why that's one of the challenges that curling has from the demographic side.
That's right. But you look in the stands, at some of these, even the Brier, it's all the older crowd, and that's why we continue doing the paper. Out of a bunch of kids, we wouldn't bother. I mean, nobody'd even read it. If you can't get it on your telephone, forget it.
So thinking back to your young man in Medicine Hat versus you're an older man, and you sort of came back to curling with that. Now you're almost kind of running your own paper again. It's a small one. It only goes out a few days a year. What was was that as much fun as being?
I didn't retire until 2002, so from the Herald. So I was doing it for 12 years. I had to take holidays to go do it.
Yeah,
So
you're taking holidays to go run a paper.
Yeah.
And did you? But I mean, I guess did it kind of have the same sort of thrill of, because pretty much you were driving the whole.
Well, it was a lot of work. Because there's only 2 of us. There's only 2 of us doing it. Yeah. In order for us to make it worthwhile for ourselves, that's the way it had to be. We didn't have enough money to hire anybody else. Yeah. We just did it ourselves. And but that time, in the latter few years of my life, I was writing a lot faster than I was back in the old days anyway.
Was that these darn computers that were faster, or just...
Well, I think probably the thing for me that got it faster was the tape recorder, even the digital recorder. Both of them, that helped me, because you could steal quotes right off it and practically lift them, and you wouldn't have to be writing all the time, And as in my latter years, I was depending a lot more on quotes than I was earlier in my writing career. But like Jonesy does all the time, he talked me into it, actually. He said, we haven't got enough quotes in your stuff.
When you've told me a couple things that I want to, in the past, that I want to pick up on. One is when you started that role with, and I don't know if it's when you started it, but at some point you said, if I'm going to do this Tankard Times, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it like a newspaper, and I'm going to be critical, and I'm going to...
That's what I told Warren. Yeah, I told Warren.
And was that right out of the bat?
Yeah. I said, I won't do it unless we can run it like a newspaper. I said, we don't want, I'm not, you can have a House League sheet and a rah-rah sheet, but I'm not going to waste my time doing it. And,
no, I'm sure you didn't do any like deep investigative reporting or anything that was.
I ripped a few of those CCA guys in their own sheet, particularly one year. I can't remember. Warren used to get mad at me. He comes stomping in and says, what did you put that on the paper for Christ's sake? Now I got this guy on my ass and that guy on my ass. I told you. I said, you know me. You've known me for years. I said, if I put my opinion in the thing, it's going to be my opinion. And,
Yeah.
And then he cooled down. Then he cooled down and walked away. And then
so you had a few of those.
Buddy again.
There were a few blow-ups over the years then when you...
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because if you think about it, it is a paper that's there for people who are there to see the Brier and they want to be entertained. And
but it has to, because I've been in the business, it's my business. It has to be that way. I'm not gonna write a rah-rah sheet or some advertising sheet or something. Yeah. I mean, either we're going to do
a puff piece or a fluff piece that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, right. It's going to be a newspaper or it's not going to be. I ripped the WCF a couple of times in there over some of those things that they did back in about 1999. I can't remember what it was. In their own sheet, it was we called that the eye opener. And I tore the WCF apart in that sheet.
How long did you have that gig for then? Not much longer, or did they...
No, we started the Brier first. When the Hearts came to Calgary in 1975, we started it in Calgary. When the Worlds... We did the Worlds. The first Worlds we did was in Kamloops, 1978. Would that be 7? No, what am I talking about? Not 78. 98. 90. I'm sorry, it was in 95.
95, yeah. 95 and so it was 90, 95, 98 was you started kind of
90,
taking the same model.
95, and then, it was actually them that wanted me to do it. I didn't have, I said, I'll do it whenever you want. So they kept working, and then we said, okay, we're going to do the Hearts. And then we're going to do the Brier, the Worlds. And then when the Canada Cup and the Continental Cup came along, we started to do that too. Yeah.
And that was right around the time that you were leaving the Herald and
that was right around the time that I was leaving the Herald, yeah. So I just did that for another 10, 12 years. I enjoyed it, I stuck in the game, and I've been there so long that, but I have to admit, in the last couple of years, I've kind of lost a little bit of interest in it because it just doesn't seem to be the same. There's not as many, as you say, characters. There's not as many interesting people. I don't like some of the maneuvers that are going on with some of these teams. There's nothing left of the old geographical, provincial thing.
Well, I tend to think that we could see a point possible. I don't know if this has come up in conversations you've had, but with Warren or whomever. But why can't a team, with the money involved and everything else associated with it? Maybe a team wants to just go to PEI, wear PEI colors, and play for PEI. If you think about the Blue Jays playing against, how many players on the Blue Jays are Toronto natives, right? Or even Ontario natives. So
that's a different point of view.
Does curling potentially reach that point? Conceivably with the opportunity to, when you win a Brier and what it can actually do for you, there certainly seems to be a reason why at some point players would be more and more willing to try to take an opportunity to get to the Brier at all costs. I think it's a question of whether the provinces then and the associations want to embrace that.
They won't touch it with a 10-foot pole, most provinces I know. I think what you're more likely to see is they'll bring the Canada Cup in as a kind of a Brier, or they'll bring that in as a kind of as a thing that leads into 75% of the Olympic trials, and then they'll take the Brier back to what it was before.
Now, are you speculating, or do you know something we don't?
Let's put it this way. That's one of the suggestions that they're mulling over. They're going to get away from this ridiculous none of it and all this stuff here in a couple of years. It's a joke. What are you talking about? 15, 20, 19, nothing and all this kind of stuff. Who's kidding who? That's getting as ridiculous as some of this World Cup qualifying with some country. But mind you, Iceland proved that all wrong too. So who knows? It's just that
Everyone's got to start somewhere, right?
That's right.
For sure.
But why does it have to be in the World Championship or the Canadian Championship? That's another argument. But I think that's. It's not a bad idea, but I don't think it will happen because I think most of these provinces are too proud. PEI doesn't want anybody but PEI representing them. Sure. They know they're not going to win, but they want to cheer for PEI, and everybody in PEI knows everybody else anyway. There isn't even 100,000 people in the place. I mean,
I live next to a fellow from PEI. I think he knows all of the other people in PEI from what I can tell. So we should probably wrap things up. Anything else that we've missed that you wanted to complain about?
About complaining?
Just...
No, not really. I told
Sorry,
you the thing. I told you the thing.
Add your perspective and
I told you the thing that was starting to I'm losing a little interest in some of this business of
the business of curling versus the game of curling, and I think that's part of it, right? The business of sport, right?
I think it is. I don't. It's happened all the way through my career. The amateur and the pro are starting to collide, and if you're going to be a pro, you're going to be a pro. If you're going to be an amateur, you're going to be an amateur. But there's somewhere in between here where it's not working, I don't think. And I don't think it's helping the spectators at the curling. The TV's great.
I guess the question is, for every club that closes down in Canada, and there seems to be every year more and more, are we at least building another one in the U.S. or another one in Japan and another one in China?
No.
And that's
maybe
the danger.
Maybe China and Japan. Definitely not the U.S.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the challenge. I mean, if we can, do you want to grow the sport as a sport that is played and competed as a social and even semi-competitive sport, or does it just continue to be very elite with a small group at a very high level? And
but look at it from the standpoint of 20 years ago. How many teams do you think would try to get to the Brier, would enter an event, would pay dues to get into a provincial playdown to go to the Brier? And how many do now? And then you look at the other aspect of it. Norway has been in the World Championship since 1967, I think. Mm-hmm. Who's the second team in Norway? You have no idea. You don't have any idea who it is. There isn't.
They're all
another
currently,
one.
Yeah.
I mean, who's the second team in any of these places?
Who's the 10th team?
Sweden's got about 3 teams at best. I think they get more teams in the women than they got in the men. They haven't done anything about any of this stuff. They're bringing the game into Latvia and all these places and some of these other places, but they're not doing anything. Their own countries aren't doing anything to get it going.
Well, I mean, part of it is there's a lot of cost to curling. Right? There's a cost to build facilities, to run facilities to all this. I almost look at it a little bit like if we look at the growth of golf in Asia, when did that really begin? It probably began in the era of, would it have been the Arnold Palmer era? Would it even been earlier? I mean, the cost and the investment that's involved in building golf courses and starting to develop.
Nicholas,
right? So it took 40, 50 years for that to develop. And I think if we look at curling in particular, it doesn't just happen overnight. And part of it is, as you say, you can build elite skills in any sport with very minimal investment from a country. I mean, you don't necessarily need to have thousands of great and highly skilled, players in a particular sport. You don't need that. You just get the cream that rises to the crop quickly, and they focus on it. But this isn't about gold medals. It's about, what is curling then? Is it really the same game that it was, or does it become a...
Well, I always thought when I joined the curling club, it was a place to go, and we could have a good time. You'd sit up above and you'd watch 16 curling teams on 8 sheets of ice, and they're all different, and their men's square draw was, and so on and so forth. It was, you played those guys and other guys, and the women played, and so on and so forth. Now, the whole thing is practically pay as you play, if they've got anybody to pay as you play. But you speak of golf, it's going the downward trend.
It's also
now,
It's
been at the top of the heap, and it's, that there isn't a golf club in Calgary with a membership waiting list. It used to be you couldn't get near some of these courses for years. Now there isn't a club in town with a waiting list, and it's it's just the way some of these things go. And golf isn't the cheapest game in the world either, but it's once you get the course, you're laughing. It's a lot cheaper than curling to get the thing going. But some of these countries they talk a good game, but they don't seem to be doing anything toward trying to. Norway is my one example. I mean, I guess they're going to have the Worlds there in a couple of years, but it'll be the first time in like 60, almost a half a century since they've been playing. Like, what have they been doing? What's the WCF doing to try and get some of these things going?
Well, I mean, the question is it their responsibility to have lots of people curling, or is it just their responsibility to administer a few people curling at a high level?
Well, I think, well, I don't know.
It's
if their responsibility is just to be the overall power to run this thing in the world, then they're not doing a very good job about getting the countries involved to improve their game. Because if it isn't any better than it is, there's about 3 countries in the world that have as many, that even come close to having as many curlers as Scotland. Even Scotland, Switzerland, and the rest of them are all states.
So as it regards to curling, are you a glass half full or half empty?
You mean going up or going down or dying?
Are you optimistic for the future?
No, I'm not right now. I'm not, because I think the more bodies that are playing the game, the better chance you're going to have better hurlers. Instead of just taking a handful and with a bunch of hotshot coaches and trying to make it. I mean, sure, we don't have much competition. Let's face it, we can keep winning this thing for a while, but
not in the women's.
No, well, the women's are. I don't know. Well, part of it is. I don't know. I'm not going to turn the thing off. I'm not getting into that.
All right.
But,
well, we got to wrap it up. Anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't?
I don't think so.
No.
But we'll think about it and maybe do it again.
I'm disappointed that we went all this way through this and now you seem to have you seem less optimistic about the future curling. I feel like a nice talk about it for a couple of hours would have made you feel more more positive.
No, I don't. No, I can't say that because I
That's
just
too bad.
don't like the way, and I just don't like the way it's going. I don't like the way their people down in Ottawa are running it. I don't like the way that they're choosing to hold play downs and they're switch around, they're trying to say, well, we'll make the Brier this year and something else like next year. And we'll bring in none of it, and then no, we don't want none of it, and then we'll bring in, I mean, they look like a bunch of blind men trying to feel their way through the room.
With a liter of scotch.
And when they dump a guy like Hansen, they're really in trouble because they don't have a leader. That's the problem with a lot of sports. Is run by bureaucrats, or are we still?
No, we'll wrap. We'll cut it off. I just can't. I'll have to figure out where to end it.
I thought we already.
It's gonna take a lot of editing.
Jesus, I hope I didn't make anybody mad.